Hello, everyone. Just going to let some folks enter in, and then we'll get started. I'm very excited to offer this series, and I'll say a little bit about it in a second. But thank you for joining us. Hello, good afternoon. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Just want to make sure that see some folks are still coming in from the waiting room. All right, and so I know we're a little limited with time because we've got an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started as folks are trickling in. They won't miss the most important part of this conversation, but I'd like to say hello and welcome you all to this professional development series and this first session in the Maximizing Your PhD Skill Set series. My name is Dr. David Sterling Brown, and I'm Assistant Professor of English at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. I am also a member of the Racial Imaginary Institute, as well as the Race Before Race Conference Series Executive Board, and I am the dramaturg for Keith Hamilton Cobb's Untitled Othello project. I'd like to start out today by thanking the Binghamton Graduate School, as well as Interim Dean Gretchen Mahler, Associate Dean Andreas Pape, Nicole Smith, the administrative assistant, who's been helping us out a lot with this series, and Yangabi Ngo, the assistant director of grad school operations, who's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes as well. I would also like to thank the Mellon Foundation and the American Council of Learned Societies for funding this series, which the goals are to help PhD candidates, as well as anyone really who's interested in acquiring knowledge, learn how you can use your skill sets to think beyond where you are. And so on that note, I would like to welcome the first guest in our series, Cyraina Johnson-Roullier. If we could have you join us now, that would be great. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. And I thank everybody that you thanked as well for making it possible.
Yes, and so I'm not going to read Cyraina's wonderful bio because that's been shared in the promo materials, and you can also look her up on the Notre Dame website. But I do want to just say that I had the wonderful opportunity to have a preliminary conversation with Cyraina about her experience, both as a professor and even her prior experience. And so all of these questions that I'm about to pose really come from that conversation. And I guess we should just go ahead and get started, because I do want to leave time at the end for folks to enter questions that they might have into the Q&A function in this series website on the Zoom's app here. So if you have questions, you can enter them as we go. We'll save probably about 15 minutes at the end for questions, and we'd love to take questions from those of you who are out there in the audience. And so to start, Cyraina, I'm really interested in learning a little bit about your unique professional trajectory. You know, you made a transition from journalism to academia. And I guess the main question I have is, what transferable skills did you take with you into academia, and how have you utilized them in your career to date?
So I actually thought I was leaving journalism behind, and then realized that I was actually using a lot of what I learned while I was doing that. And I can kind of break that down to three really important things that I see, particularly for doctoral students. And the first one is how to ask non-scholarly questions in order to get the full picture of whatever your subject is that will lead you to deeper scholarly questions. And I didn't know that it would work that way at first. And the second thing is how to stay on task and not go off on a tangent. Because, you know, we all know what it is to do researching, and then all of a sudden, wow, that's so fascinating. And then you're like way off.
Yes.
And you don't really have time to do that. And the third one, which I think is the most important, is how to write on demand. And what I mean by that is when you're doing reporting, for example, which I did a lot of freelance reporting, you really can't wait to figure out, what am I writing about? What am I doing? It's like time to write, there's a deadline in front of you, and you just have to sit down and make it come out. So writing on demand, which is extremely important for academics, I think is probably the most significant transferable skill that I brought with me. Oh, David, I can't hear you.
Writing on demand is something that I can definitely relate to. It's certainly something that I've had to do, something that I ask my students to do. And, you know, I love this point that you make about asking non-scholarly questions that lead to deeper questions within your work. And so those are the places where we begin to sort of mine this wealth of knowledge. And so what can all humanities PhDs do with the knowledge they acquired during their training beyond becoming professors?
Well, I think one of the important things is not the content of what you're learning, but rather the structure. Because one of the things that doctoral training does for you is it teaches you how to learn, how to teach yourself in a very deep way. And basically, coming out of school with that education enables you to learn the basics of almost everything. And if you can't learn it, it does enable you to figure out what you don't know and to be able to think about how much more training you need to be able to move in that direction. So I think it's really important in the sense that you learn how to go into a field of knowledge and become functional there in ways that you would never know how to do as an undergraduate.
Yes, definitely can also relate to that too. And when you say content versus structure, could you maybe break that down a little bit?
Yeah, what I mean is you can be a doctoral student in any subject. And the way we're basically educated is to say, oh, we've studied this subject, so we become an expert in this subject. But what I mean by the structure is that you learn how you become that expert. And because you know how you became that expert, how you learned how to research, how you learn how to ask questions and think critically about them, and what basically knowledge is what you can take with you. It doesn't have to be whatever that content is that you got your degree in. You can take that structure and learn any number of other fields.
Oh,
Credible.
and so therein lies the transferability of all of this, right? We can
Right.
take that structure and move it into a totally different professional world if we need to.
Right, and feel confident about that. I mean, I would say that, and I may be anticipating one of your questions, but since I'm an English professor, I like to try to undergird the confidence of my students who are very worried about that. And so I tell them, you know, the only difference between you and somebody who's studying to be in a particular box is that you have to do more to tell the employer why they need you.
Hmm.
But you also know how to do it because you've learned, critical thinking and all those other things. And as a doctoral student, you know how to research. So you can figure out what to tell them.
And I love that framing, telling, I never thought about it that way, actually, although I do think about it as, I'm trying to make myself unique, but telling an employer why they need me, because I'm
Yes.
unique, you're unique. And when you really think about it in those terms, you're showing them that you have something that can be offered that no one else has.
Right. And the thing is, like in English, you are analyzing texts. Well, all you have to do is take whatever employer and think of that employer as the text that you're analyzing and go into it, figure out what is that employer about? What's their mission statement? What are they most interested in? What do they need? And how do you fit the bill?
Ooh, I love that too, because, thinking about the employer as the text, that's what we do, right? We spend a lot of time analyzing these texts, close reading these texts, and then being able to figure them out and write about and make arguments about them. So
Yeah,
what argument can I make about what this particular employer needs? And again, how I fit that bill is a great way
yeah.
to do this.
What argument do you make about you in
Yes,
that
and that
context?
yes, it's a reading yourself. So, I can relate to you a little bit because I'm also someone who didn't go straight into academia. And that's a question that I have for you. And there are a lot of folks out there who they got their BAs, but they did other work prior to going and pursuing the PhD. And so why is it important to harness the skills that one develops in the workaday world and bring them into academia?
I think it's a wonderful question because it's really very different. The biggest thing is that academia is a wide open terrain with no compass. And once you get in there, if you're not a self-starter or you don't know how to build a plan, you're gonna flounder. And so one of the things that's really good for coming from the workaday world is that you've got an idea of how to structure a day from having had to have your day structured in a job. So you would bring with you that from the workaday world, an understanding of discipline, an understanding of time management, because a lot of um, academia has to do with managing your time.
Yes.
Basically, nobody is going to bother you until it comes time to show who you are on paper. And if you don't manage your time and you have no discipline, and you think, yeah, I can hang out and party because nobody's on your back,
Yeah.
you actually can't do that. And you have to understand that no, there is a serious discipline, whether anybody is watching you or not, or when it comes time to show your paper, you're not going to have what needs to be on it. It just will not happen. And this is not something that you can do in crunch time. It just won't happen. They will be able to tell.
Yes, and that's, we hear that P word, procrastination, is something that a lot of folks who are in academia, battle with that, or writer's block and things of that nature. But results is the key word that you just
Yes,
used. Um,
exactly. And one of the ways to get there is just form yourself a daily practice. Make it every day that you have to do something on that. And for those, if I remember correctly, the other part of your question was, what about those who are working while going to school?
yes.
If you're in a doctoral program, this is a very big challenge. It's very hard because doctoral studies are extremely time consuming. So here I would say discipline is even more important. So you're going to need a timeline for what you have to do at work and another timeline for what you have to get done for school. So you can keep all the deadlines straight and so you can adjust your activity level to those deadlines. So you get things done in time and on time.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I was thinking about too, so when I was in graduate school, I had to get a job because I needed to pay the bills, and I worked at the Rare Books Library at New York University, and the Fales Library there, and it didn't occur to me until after the fact that even though it seemed like I was doing menial tasks, I was actually acquiring some skills, and if I just put a little more thought into it, I was acquiring skills that would be useful to me. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what tips do you have for folks who might be in that position now? How can they sort of shift their thinking so that it's not so much, I'm doing this work to pay the bills, but this work is actually useful for some greater purpose?
Oh, so just keep your eyes and ears open and learn. Like, learn as much as you can. Don't look at that job as, oh, I have to do this because, I don't have enough money to pay bills. What a chore. Look at it instead as an opportunity and find where those opportunities might be, and then try to take advantage of them, because I have found that in almost everything you do, no matter how irrelevant it might seem to your future goals, there's an opportunity there. And you need to keep your eyes and ears open for every single opportunity, because they will all offer you something that you might be able to use in the future. And you may not even know that on the day of. You may not know that for a number of years. And then you realize all of a sudden, wow, that was actually really useful.
Yes, I've actually had moments happen like that where I'm like, I'm in this room and I'm here because I have to be. And then lo and behold, something sort of magical happens or
Yeah,
some connection is created later. And so I think what I've learned through my experience is there's a huge difference between being in the room and not being in the room. And if you're not in the room, you'll never know.
right. And if you're in the room and open, anything can happen. I mean, it doesn't have to be momentous, but
Right.
it might be.
Yeah.
But if you're closed, nothing will happen, neither momentous nor non-momentous.
Exactly. And that's the difference between, I think, to go back to something you said earlier, this idea of being a self-starter
Yeah,
and being a go-getter versus not. It really can make all the difference.
yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit because there's so much you have to offer, and I don't want us to run out of time. And I wanted to ask you about your public-facing writing, because that's an area where I think, folks who have the PhD skill set can do stuff sort of outside of the field or get their voices outside of just, our sort of silos. So
Yeah.
where have you published public-facing writing, and how does one go about breaking into that world?
So, I well, here was where I realized, wait a minute, journalism didn't go away just because I left it behind. There it is, right there. I still think like that on some levels. And I realized at a certain point while I was moving forward as an academic that I was getting frustrated because I was writing all this stuff that was fascinating me, but which was destined to go into some dark corner in the library where nobody would ever see it. And it's not that I necessarily wanted people to see it for myself, it's that I thought that the things that I was working on deserved to be thought about by a wider audience. So I spent a long time trying to figure out how I get out of this idea that I've written myself into. I felt like some kind of a Rapunzel.
Mm,
And I thought I, there has to be a way. And so over a long period of time, I began to realize that the way to write myself out of the silo, because I also wanted it to be informed by the complexity of my research, but from the complexity of my research, I cannot really speak to a broad audience.
right.
So I tried to figure out what in my research can make that crossover. So the thing that I began to focus on was the idea of human. Like, what does human mean? And how do we understand it? And I began to think about that in relation to the kinds of things I was writing about systemic racism. And as I began to do that, I began to see ways in which I could talk about humanness
Mm.
in ways that I could not, for example, talk about Foucault.
Yeah, because not everybody on the street knows who Foucault is.
Right. And so I thought, yes, but there's much in Foucault that can inform what
Yes.
you're saying about humans. And even though academia will not recognize that as something that helps you on that academic trajectory, it doesn't mean that you can't translate that value in a more public context where people who don't have a doctoral background can still pick up a lot of it. And when I start to do that, I also start to use a lot of personal anecdote.
And so putting your human self into the work.
Yes. Mm.
I love that, because I think this idea of translating or transferring the value of your knowledge so that you can speak to different audiences, and it's not talking down to people. It is sort of broadening through your voice how accessible what it is that you have to offer really can be.
And without dumbing down the academic part of it, it's totally informed by all that knowledge I have. And that's about learning how to write without jargon. Now, at a certain point, you're going to be trying to apply for grants if you decide to stay in academia. And all the grants are going to say, leave the jargon out, because some of the people who are going to be reading your grant, they have no idea what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to make it accessible to them. So I think is a valued and important skill to learn how to communicate from your research position with anyone.
Yeah, and even outside of academia, because something I do, I spend a lot of time at my local art gallery here, and so the art education director there, he just wrote a grant and got funding from the state of Connecticut for projects that they're doing there at the Norwalk Art Space. But again, being able to speak to a broad audience, because I'm not an artist, right? But I am somebody who knows how to read. I'm somebody who knows how to hear and listen. And so he is able to talk to me in ways that help me understand his project and what he's doing, even though it's completely outside of the realm of what I do. Another question that I have for you, thinking about public writing, you talked about the human, and you gestured toward the concept of racism, of course, and how that feeds into your work. What is the price that one might pay for using their public voice?
Well, it's a tough question, and everybody has to answer that for themselves. And I think for myself, I think that I have a lot to say about the problem of systemic racism, because I've experienced a lot of it. And it's hard to find a venue for expressing it because it's often made very invisible. So it means that you have to be willing to be vulnerable and personal, and that can be very hard. At the same time, I can't say that I'm not a little worried about the kinds of things I write in our current cultural climate. I mean, I have to tell my students that actually what I'm teaching right now is against the law in Florida.
Yes, me too.
Like, if you can wrap your mind around that, which I have a hard time with, but it also galvanizes me to tell the truth and not to be silenced. Silence never helps anyone.
Yep.
So I think it's sort of like you have to grapple with any worries or concerns you have and then rise above them. For me, speaking out is more important than silence. And I feel a responsibility about it because I have the tools, I have the education, I have the skills, I can write. And to be silent, to me, in that kind of a situation is kind of irresponsible.
Hmm. And I think as, folks who consider themselves humanists, it is important to be responsible
Mhm.
with the work that we do. And, I got a little bit from you there in terms of why it's important to honor, that particular voice. And I guess you mentioned, being vulnerable and personal, and also a feeling of responsibility to tell the truth. When I think about the constellation of those three things, is that what makes or can at least help make someone unique in terms of putting themselves out there and sort of being an individual as they are trying to do this kind of work?
Um, wow, that one is very complicated, David, because the trajectory on that front, um, for me has been long and hard. But I think uh, what's at the heart of it is that I really don't like being told to be somebody that is not me.
Me neither.
And I'm very committed. I'm very committed to who I am. And um, I believe that in order to really um, do work that's meaningful to you, you need to shine in your own way, and you need to have the courage and the confidence to do it, and also the commitment. Um, I wanted to be authentic, and I had so many pressures in my academic trajectory not to be authentic, but rather to mold myself to. I'm again going to uh, touch one of your other questions that you haven't asked yet, but to mold myself into being who other people thought I should be. And I resisted that because I know who I am and I have the right to be who I am. I don't have to be what other people want me to be. What I need to do is simply stand up to that and refuse it. And I think that's very, very important in an academic trajectory because that's how you speak with your own voice. And you have to learn what that is. What is your own voice and what is the voice of others? And I'll anticipate again, David, that is important because one of the things that I learned as time went on was that when I felt most uncomfortable and anxious and worried about what I was writing, where I thought, oh no, that's dumb. Like, don't write that. That's really stupid. Nobody's going to like it. This was actually when I was being most original.
Hmm.
And when I learned that, I thought, okay, listen, those feelings are your friends.
Yeah. Oh, I
Because,
love that. Those feelings are your friends.
yeah, because academics have to be original. So I'm like, if you're feeling scared, you need to keep going down that path.
Yeah, and that's hard. Oh gosh, I have like a million questions just popped into my head now. Um, because well, one, as you were talking, because Shakespeare in me, I couldn't help but think of the phrase "to thine own self be true."
Yeah,
Of
of course.
course, in terms of being authentic and knowing thyself. But the voice question is really, really hard. It took me a long time to find my voice, for instance. And so how did you find your voice? How did you know you found it?
Well, I found it by hard labor, but I'm not sure that I ever really lost the voice itself. What I found was a way to make it comprehensible.
Okay.
Because I had to deal with silence because I was told many times you don't have anything to say about that. A prime example is that when I was writing my dissertation was I'm a modernist, and I was frustrated by the fact that at that time, a really long time ago in the Ice Age, nobody was thinking about the real significance of race in modern discourse. And so I wanted to write my dissertation about Joyce, Proust, and Baldwin. And for me, it was contrasting high modernism against what others would have called low modernism or not modernism at all. But in my mind, I thought, well, Baldwin is a modernist from a different perspective, but nobody sees him that way. But I could barely find anybody to work with me. They all told me, you don't have anything to say about Proust or Joyce. Why don't you just write about Baldwin?
Hmm.
And I thought, no, I'm not writing only about Baldwin because I'm missing the entire point.
Yeah, and that when you have those moments, I found actually, I mean, my career hasn't been that long, but I'm in year 8, and I found in those moments where people are either telling me no or telling me I can't or telling me, that's when you need to keep going.
Right. And there's another very important, this is very important, maybe the most important thing I've said today about that, which is that I was worried about writing myself into somebody else's understanding in such a way that I wouldn't be able to get back out and be true to myself for after I got tenure. Because the pressure before you get tenure is to write whatever you have to write to be accepted.
Yeah.
And I thought, sure, I can do that. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to do such damage to my own intellectual growth and development that when I get tenure, if I get tenure, I'm not going to have any idea what to say. And beyond that, I'm not going to be committed to it.
And you won't know who you are because you will have lost yourself in the process of trying.
Exactly.
It's kind of what I did when I was working on my dissertation.
Right. So I resisted, and there was great cost involved in resisting. But now I was willing to make that sacrifice so that I would have it later. And now that I have tenure, I got through that process with the integrity of my intellectual being.
And maintaining one's sense of self and also integrity when doing this particular work, and not doing work to please a committee or to think that it's the work that's going to get you a job. Like, you will get you the job is something that I have learned through my career. And operating with integrity is something that I appreciate and admire about the work that you do, especially as it relates to your activism. And so how is the work that you do as a scholar linked to activism or to addressing systemic racism and other inequalities?
Well, what's really funny about that is that I've always been doing that. But now the world has become like this very strange place that I see the ways in which I need to offer value there everywhere.
Hmm.
Like, for example, the whole like political moment we've been going through, there's a lot going on there that I'm not sure we as a people fully understand, especially historically. Like, I watched every single minute of the Jackson confirmation hearings, like every single minute of it, and I was shocked and horrified by what was happening to her.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was just, this is not right. So I ended up writing an op-ed about that.
Yeah, I guess, you get these moments where there's sort of, you feel yourself, your body, your mind responding to things.
Yes.
And that's when I found like, oh, I probably have something to say. At the very least, this is something I care about because it's got my attention.
Right. And so the one problem, though, is that public-facing writing is very different from the academic writing. And most of the time, the place that you're thinking about submitting your work to is on the news cycle. And the news cycle moves so fast. So fast. It's really hard to keep up. And one way, though, to think about doing that, if it interests you, is to look up this organization called the Op-Ed Project, because they offer workshops that actually show you how to do it. They are so useful.
What's
I
it called
worked with
again? I just want to make sure I get it.
op-ed projects.
Project. Okay.
Just Google that and you're going to find them. They are amazing. You can take a workshop, and in that workshop, they're going to show you how to write op-eds like that. And there are a lot of benefits and perks engaged with that. But I would encourage anyone who's interested in that to Google them and take that workshop. It's called the Changing the World workshop.
Okay, that's good to know. Because I have a resource I want to show folks too. So I'm like, yes, we can throw out resources. And when you think about, though, operating with integrity, and also the fact that you are someone who wants to offer your value everywhere that you can, why, though, is it important for you to be an agent of change through your work?
Well, I think I have a unique perspective, which, I mean, everybody has a unique perspective, but I understand what is unique about my perspective. And because of that, I feel that I have to express that for others. And what that is that I actually have a very strange background for most people, because I grew up in a little town in Ohio, which actually has historical connections with the whole utopian movement in the 19th century.
Okay.
And, you wouldn't think so in Ohio, but I'll say how Dave Chappelle said it because he lives there. I don't know him personally because he's about 13 years younger than I am, but the town is so small, I usually know everybody. But on David Letterman, he said, it's like a Bernie Sanders island in a Trump sea. And I think that really, I
Wow.
think that really did, um, crystallize it. And, but it's a strange, um, relationship to the American world. And I always say that it, having grown up there forever unfits you to be a Black person in this country. And I
Wow.
mean that in terms of the way in which other people perceive what Blackness is supposed to be.
Hmm.
I'm really fit that. And this is on either side. I'm not just talking about how white people might perceive it, but Black people too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of or inability to understand difference on that level. So I feel like I need to get that out there in ways that people can understand.
Okay. And one of the things I know that you recently joined Claudia Rankine's The Racial Imaginary Institute's curatorial team, for instance, and I'm curious to know about your desire to be part of TRI as it relates to this notion of your activism, as your interest in race. And for those who don't know, the Racial Imaginary Institute is like an interdisciplinary think tank of different folks from different backgrounds who are subscribing to the notion that no sphere of life is left untouched by race. And so there's an activist component to the Institute and a lot of creative work that's done behind as well. But I'm curious if you could talk about that sort of move in your among your interests, Cyraina.
Well, I was interested for several reasons. I mean, if you know anything about Claudia Rankine's work, you know that she is very much positioned in terms of trying to disrupt dominant narratives that characterize who we are as Americans, like her book Citizen. It's just amazing. And if you think about who we are right now, we're a very divided people. And part of the reason why we are so divided is because we can't find common ground. And well, the book I'm working on now is precisely about our are basically our national divide. And I'm my thought about that is that one of the reasons why we can't find common ground is because we're far too worried about our differences than we are about our similarities. And I look at how this enormous technological advance that's coming out of us or to us is basically going to make our commonalities, for example, that being human, much more important than our differences.
Yes.
And so it's about the way in which we imagine each other for me. And so I'm very interested in this idea of a racial imaginary because I think a lot of times we meet someone and we're not really meeting them as a human, as a person. We're meeting them as what they look like to us in terms of received cultural notion. And I don't agree with that because everybody deserves to be a unique human individual, and we should not stifle our curiosity about them just because we think they represent something. So that fits all of the things I'm trying to do, and I was also interested in the fact that the racial imaginary is hybrid. Like there's also a visual component.
Yes.
That's very intriguing to me. So I haven't got my project together yet, but I'm thinking hard about what I'm going to do and very excited about.
No, no, thank you for sharing that because as someone else who's a part of the curatorial team, I wasn't really thinking much in visual terms until I joined the Racial Imaginary Institute. And so if I could share something with those out there in the audience, it would be to expand and broaden your horizons. I think you and I were sort of lucky because we came into academia with a different background, but even if someone doesn't, there are things that you can get involved with, like the Racial Imaginary Institute or things that might be happening on a campus that can really help you see the importance of both interdisciplinary thinking, but also ways of speaking to different audiences. And I have two more questions for you, Cyraina, before I open it up to the audience, who you can type in the Q&A function of Zoom if you have questions for Cyraina. But speaking of different audiences, right, we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if we can just sort of put a little pressure on this question so that folks can really understand why this is so important. But how does your PhD or just even having a formal education enable you to speak to different audiences, and why is that so important?
Um, well, I think it enables me to speak to different audiences because of the research component. Because in a doctoral education, you learn how to manipulate knowledge. And when I say manipulate it, I don't mean with a negative connotation. I think that's why the tenure system is so important. Because since you have that very, very significant skill, you could be co-opted to make use of it in the wrong ways
Right.
if you were not protected in ways that could harm other people because you might be afraid for your own safety. But if you are protected from harm, then it's more likely that you have the freedom to pursue research without undue pressure. So, um, so when I say the research component, I mean that because I am a researcher, I know how to dig around to find out things about an audience that disagrees with me and to learn about them, or an audience, a potential audience that I know nothing about. I can use those skills to do that. And that can be useful in a non-academic job as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And say you're a grant writer, you might need to do that so that you can optimally write a grant for your employer. But I think it's important to be able to communicate with different audiences, because to me, the value of research is not to enclose it in a little box by itself. What is the point of creating knowledge if you cannot offer it to the world for the world's benefit?
I love that. I'm going to tweet that question later. I love that question. Because yeah, what is the point? And that's something that I have certainly thought about. You know, before I came into academia, I was a recruiter for Teach for America, and that job required me to talk to different audiences, from university presidents to undergraduate students. And it was an eye-opening experience, and it very much relates to what you're saying right now. Is I had to study those different audiences and be able to figure out, okay, how do I sort of influence and motivate this person based on what it is that's important to them or what their needs are? And these are questions that we're asking ourselves all the time as researchers.
Right. And I think it's a very important thing to recognize, because to get our research off the ground, we're thinking so hard and so much about what we're trying to say that we may forget there's another side.
Yes.
And it's important to not just, I don't mean pander to the other side, but at least perhaps make an opening so the other side might have an opportunity to consider your work, even if they don't agree with it.
Yes.
But beyond that, just to show that you are knowledgeable enough to even know what that is. Because then you don't look narrow-minded. And I think in that kind of a sense, then your research becomes even more valuable.
Yes. And so on that note, I'm going to ask my last question. We're going to get a little into the personal here, because I just really appreciated your sharing this when I had my preliminary chat with you. And then I'd love to open it up for questions from the audience. So if you would like to type anything into the Q&A, you can feel free to start doing that now. You can use the Q&A function in Zoom. But my last question is just, you know, when we spoke previously, you noted that at times during your career, you know, you'd been anxious, you were uncomfortable, and your professional path had you feeling those feelings, but that often let you know that you were on the right path, or that you were at least moving in the right direction. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, because it's really hard to sit with discomfort, especially when we're all
Oh,
independent work.
it is so hard to sit with it. And it's so hard to push forward when you don't feel confident. But I had to just think about that as, what do I want for myself? And what use do I want my efforts in my career to be for others? I was very much concerned about how to make what I'm trying to do useful. And I had a whole lot of pressure at the beginning of my career, from my doctoral program into my academic future, to be an African Americanist.
Oof.
And that was simply because I was a Black person. And I felt that my own intellectual interests were being denied. And that in a way, because of that, even my person was being denied, and that I had to fight for that. So there were sacrifices involved as well. People who couldn't deal with that
Mm.
People who treated me badly because of that. People who imagined me as someone who denied or rejected their African American heritage when none of that was true. It's just that I felt I had the right to be the intellectual I wanted to be, and that I didn't have to be somebody that other people created.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, you have to fight for that right. That is your individual right. Nobody can take that away from you unless you let them. And one of the biggest sacrifices I made to do that was that when I first began my academic career, I had letters from all over the country, from universities, asking me to apply for African American positions.
Oh.
And I said no. And then after a while, the letters stopped.
Hmm.
No more asking you to apply. And there was even one moment where, and the university shall remain unnamed, but where I applied for an American literature position because I'm an American modernist, well, really an international modernist, but the university's structure wouldn't let me do that. But I applied and never heard anything, so I called them and they said, you didn't apply for that. I said, yes, I did. And I haven't heard anything. And so they're like, well, let's look. Then they came back and said, well, you applied for the minority position. And I said, no, I didn't.
Huh.
And they were not interested in interviewing me for the American literature position.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, well, that's how it's going to be done.
Yeah, well, the lesson I'm getting from that story, though, is that you have to fight for what you want and you have to listen to your instincts.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've talked about also. I love the synergy that I'm seeing in these different sessions with one of our future speakers, Noir Al-Sadir. So on that note,
Well, wait 1 second, David.
Oh,
Just let me add one important thing.
oh, sure.
Is that you also have to realize that that's a scary thing and you're going to have to make big sacrifices for it, which I did. And I probably made a lot less because I did not take that path. But because they were willing to pay a lot, right? But I turned that down. And but in the end, it's worth it.
It is. And as one of actually the final speaker in our series, who's a friend of mine and just very brilliant, as he once told me, all money is not green. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. Money is important, but not all of it is green. And so we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to open it up for questions. If anyone wants to type anything into the Q&A, feel free to pose questions to Cyraina about anything that has been said thus far, or questions that you have that maybe weren't part of this conversation yet. But as we're waiting for that, I will just say, the scary and sort of sacrificial part of this is really daunting, because I didn't, getting a PhD and going to graduate school is hard enough. But then to think that you might have, because I have a similar experience when I was on the job market and I got an offer from a school, but I hadn't yet finished my other interviews. And they were like, nope, take it or leave it. And I had to leave it. And it was so scary because I was like, what if this is my only opportunity to get into this world? But you have to believe in yourself. That's also something that I'm learning from you and this conversation, is that believing in yourself is incredibly important and can go a long way.
Well, the nice thing about it is that if you can be really future oriented and not think so much about today, when you get to that future, which you will get to at some point, you will have something that you would not have if you didn't fight for it.
Yes. And that's another lesson I'm getting from this session with you, is that, because I didn't know that story about, you and the jobs that were being sort of presented to you, but had you rushed your own process, you would have ended up in one of those jobs perhaps, but maybe not be as happy as you are and doing what you really love and want to do.
Yeah, I really love what I do. I just love it. I have so much fun. I have fun teaching. I have fun writing, even though it's painful. I'm having fun here.
Well, yes, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's all fun.
Yeah, and it's important to sort of honor again what you want.
Mhm.
And that is so hard to do, especially, and I didn't quite mention that earlier, but when you're writing a dissertation or you're working on these projects as an MA student or whatever it might be, or even an undergraduate student, but you have a particular audience that you're dealing with, and it can be hard to, resist that. So we do have one question from Dara. I'd like to put that in there. She thanks you for your insights and speak. It's to this all money is not green. She just learned that think tanks are an option as a job, and she's interested in policy change and wondering what your thoughts might be and if you know of anything about what options might exist as far as policy change.
Um, you know what? Thank you for that question, because I have not thought about that. So now I am learning something from you, and I'm very pleased to learn it, because I think hearing your question, my work is probably trying to do that, and I didn't know it.
Hmm.
So now I'm gonna have to go dig around and use my doctoral training research structure to find out what I can do with that.
Well, and yeah, no, I love that. How, see, and all these things sort of one thing feeds another. But one thing I can say to answer your question, I remember when I was on the job market, I looked at the federal government website, and I don't know if you are writing from the United States, actually, because we've got people from all over the world on this call, actually. But if you are, and even if you're not, there are a lot of jobs available on the federal government website that are actually looking for people who have PhDs. And so those are spaces and places where one can go to, in effect, be a change maker outside of academia.
Yeah, I think it is a wonderful uh, training and preparation for
Yeah.
being exactly that, a change maker. And just listening to what David was saying, another couple of possibilities might be foundations who are also very much engaged with that, and also nonprofits.
Yes.
And don't forget that you have the power yourself, because you know what to do with ideas. You have the power yourself to make nonprofits, to
Yes.
do startups,
Yep.
to do what you need to do to get funding. I mean, I think the sky is the limit for you. You're a
Yeah.
very fortunate group of people.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think when we hear from the Midnight Oil Collective, they can talk a little bit about that too. That's, I think, coming up in a couple sessions from now. But foundations, nonprofits, even my work with Teach for America, and I think about people who I worked with there who then moved on to do other things, they used, again, thinking about what Cyraina said earlier, never just think about a job as just a job, but think about what you can learn from it, what you can glean
Right.
that can be useful in your toolkit later in life. A lot of people have done that in spaces and places that I've been in.
Right. And I actually work with a nonprofit as well. It's called CPS Lives in Chicago, and they're working with the arts to try to create positive narratives around the public schools. And I have found that a lot of my doctoral training comes into play in trying to figure out how best to serve those communities.
Yeah, and I would say too, so next week's session, since we're wrapping up here, is going to be me in conversation with Simon Wu, who is a PhD candidate at Yale University and also a member of the Racial Imaginary Institute curatorial team. But Simon has done a lot of work, even in the art world, in terms of thinking about making change. And so I would definitely encourage you to join that session as well as future sessions in this series. But on that note, we've reached one. I wish I could talk to you all afternoon, Cyraina.
Thank you.
I know that I'll see you on Sunday anyways, but
Yeah.
it has been great. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank Binghamton again for hosting this session, partnering with me and Trinity College on it. And we will hopefully see many of you back next week. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
And take care. Bye.
Bye.